All of us are more than one-dimensional figures. We all have interests, talents, and ambitions that go beyond what we might do publicly at any one point. And we all have the ability to change direction and do something completely removed from the thing that people expect of us. For one woman, that involved a dramatic shift of identities and a move from notorious glamour model to acclaimed author. This is the Overlooked Hotel, and this is the story of the strange double, or perhaps triple, life of Clare Dunkel. The story of Clare Dunkel, who died in 2021, is a fascinating one. Evidence that we can reinvent ourselves and proof that the glamour models of the 1980s, that a lot of people think of as either airheaded bimbos or exploited victims, are actually just like everybody else. Individuals with their own talents, abilities, personalities, and interests. Not exactly news to many of us, I'm sure, but the sort of thing that unfortunately needs continually emphasising in a world where people still like to dismiss these women. Clare Dunkel was a person with multiple public identities. As Mo Hayder, she authored 10 crime novels that were noted for their graphic, horror-flavoured violence and sold some 6.5 million copies worldwide. Crime fiction is a curious genre that sits on the edge of respectability. It's hugely popular, particularly with female readers, yet still always viewed with suspicion by the pearl clutchers who fret about everything from salaciousness to misogyny. It's also an extremely overcrowded field, and so any author who wants to stand out needs something special about them. In Dunkel's case, it seemed to be an emphasis on brutality and gore-drenched descriptions that pushed the works into the realms of horror. In the 1980s, however, nobody would have imagined that Clare Dunkel had best-selling, critically acclaimed crime novels in her. Back then, she was known as Candy Davis, a briefly ubiquitous glamour model noted for her hypersexual persona, big blonde hair, willingness to strip off, and an unexpected flair for comedy. Predictably, the former attributes rather overshadowed the latter, and while Davis had a recurring role as Mr. Grace's secretary in Are You Being Served, a role that was also filled over the years by Penny Irving and Debbie Linden, and appeared in the Benny Hill Show, she was generally seen as nothing more than a bit of totty, the sort of eye candy for male viewers that these shows specialised in. Whether or not Candy Davis was a good actor was something that nobody bothered to find out, but her brief appearances in these shows and spots in Cannon and Ball, Bottle Boys, The Two Ronnies, where her various roles included Miss Exotica Stormtrooper, are all memorable. I've long maintained that these small parts as glamour stooges require far more talent than the actors are given credit for, with a lot of physical comedy required without much rehearsal time or direction. Around the same time that she was doing these shows, she also had a fairly significant role in an episode of Minder where she played a stripper. Typecasting maybe, but it allowed her to display her acting ability as much flesh as was permissible in a pre-Watershed show. Perhaps in another world a mainstream acting or comedy career might have beckoned, but I suspect that her modelling career may well have put an end to that at a time when glamour girls were on their way out and adult entertainment, even of the mildest sort, was still seen as socially unacceptable. At the same time that she was securing these small TV roles, Candy Davis worked as a stripper, appeared very briefly in the 1983 film version of Fanny Hill, which was a last gap of glossy erotica by British filmmakers, was a regular page 3 girl, and was crowned Miss Nude UK in 1982, a contest that may or may not have actually existed outside the world of Electric Blue videos where the contest was featured. She became something of an Electric Blue regular when she became well known through Are You Being Served. There's nothing more appealing than a celebrity nude after all. Though her appearances in these later episodes tended to be fully clothed, acting as compere in various contests that involved bare-breasted women. While these appearances cashed in on her mainstream fame, they probably also affected it. Rather hypocritically, the press took moral offence to her appearances in these quote-unquote porn videos, even though they ran very similar material in their newspapers, and the TV producers who had hired her to flash her cleavage and parade around in skimpy outfits had similar double standards. In a different time, Candy Davis might have become a cult figure like Valerie Leon, Margaret Nolan, or Madeline Smith, somebody who could be both sexy and funny. But the mid-1980s was a terrible time for British cinema, and the TV glamour girl was already becoming very unfashionable. Few glamour girls have successfully transitioned beyond that role because producers and directors simply don't take them very seriously. For Candy Davis, the problem was compounded because she'd broken that unwritten law that said mainstream sex appeal was fine, but soft porn was beyond the pale. You could be cast in TV shows as Sexy Blonde, which was literally her credit for a Cannon and Ball appearance, but God forbid you be too sexy. In any case, Candy Davis saw her career stuck in a rut of small parts in films like the Clive Barker adaptation Underworld, or being a background dancer in ABC's music video for Poison Arrow. She was probably well aware that there's only so long that you can make a living as a glamour girl under these circumstances, especially if the media suddenly turns against you. Reinvention is, perhaps, the only way forward. And so Candy Davis was retired and Clare Dunkel took time away from the media spotlight, moving to Japan at the end of the 1980s after divorce from actor Gary Olsen. While in Japan, she became slowly obsessed with violent crime, death, and revenge after a friend of hers was raped. She wrote her first novel, Birdman, in 1995, and it was published 4 years later under the pen name Mo Hayder, becoming an immediate sensation thanks to its dark, graphic descriptions, something that she would expand on in subsequent books. Her novels Ritual and The Treatment were adapted as Dutch movies during the 2000s, and in 2023, Wolf was filmed as a BBC TV series. Whether this leads to further adaptations of her Jack Caffrey series of novels remains to be seen. She won an Edgar Award in 2012 and was nominated for several other writing awards in her career. While her novels were at the extreme end of crime fiction, they were still critical and commercial successes, and she became respected in a way that might have seemed impossible back in the 1980s. How many people knew about her previous career is unclear. As a novelist, she didn't really seek the limelight and remained a fairly mysterious figure. Neither she nor her publishers were making it public, and so there was no reason why anyone would make the connection from Mo Hayder to Clare Dunkel to Candy Davis unless they were really digging. And in truth, it wasn't really relevant to her writing anyway, so those who might have brought it up would have just been seen as muckraking. It's unclear what Clare Dunkel thought of her past persona. As far as I can tell, she was never really asked about it. I had hoped to do so for a Desperate Living article because every aspect of her career fitted into our interests. But by the time I was ready to approach her, she'd already been diagnosed with motor neuron disease. The illness progressed rapidly from her diagnosis in December 2020, leading to her death in July the next year. So I hope that she lived her life with no regrets and was proud of everything that she'd achieved. If you enjoy these explorations of lost, forgotten, or ignored bits of history, then of course make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And let us know in the comments. Have you read Mo Hayder novels? Do you remember Candy Davis? We appreciate every interaction and read all your comments, eventually. And your support for this channel is much appreciated, and if any of you have suggestions for other forgotten histories that we should be exploring, then I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.